Well, welcome back to the Azure podcast. This is episode number 475, being recorded on the 4th of October, 2023. With special guests Alice Gibbons and Kendall Roden, actually, who's going to be serving both as our special guest today, as well as doing her usual duty as our co-host. So it'll be interesting. I think this is about the third time you've been a guest on the show, Kendall.
Yeah, I think this is the third time actually, which is exciting. And it's always been a very different topic. So
exactly, yeah. From the college days, I think it was the first one, and I forget what the second episode was about. And then
container ops, I think. I think it was
ops.
Right when I joined the container ops team. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. Well, before we get to Alice and Kendall on a very interesting topic and service that they offer, and they're representing their partner companies, Diagrid, who both of them work for now, and some of the offerings that they have on Azure. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. But before that, let's cover a couple of news items. And honestly, not a whole lot this week. I was looking through all the updates. And essentially, there's just a slew of services that are being retired or things that are going out of scope or service support and things like that. So I just want to encourage our listeners to keep an eye, go to the Azure updates and just make sure that none of them are being you're going to be impacted by any of those updates, right? Because it's just too many of them to have been announced here. There's a lot of batch API decommissioning and things like that going on. So please take a look at that. But I'll tell you of a couple of things that did come up as news. And one is something that's pretty cool, the Azure Data Explorer add-on for Splunk. And Splunk's pretty popular these days. Didn't they get bought out recently? I forget who bought Splunk. But
I don't know, but they are popular. I will say that.
They are popular, yeah. And Azure Data Explorer, as you know, is our large data management system to get and do analytics and real-time analysis of all this data. And of course, Splunk, there's a lot of data in Splunk, so you kind of put them together and you can get the best of both worlds. So that's certainly something to look forward to. And also in the realm of big data is HD Insights for AKS. And so now AKS lets you run HD Insights, workloads right within your cluster itself. And that would be pretty interesting for folks because, a lot of people standardize on AKS and they want to run all their workloads on AKS. And so this is another easy way to do it by running the HD Insights there. All right, so that's kind of, like I said, for the update.
So, Jeet, I had a couple others too, just to throw in my co-host hat. So one of them is Container Apps now has the Azure Savings Plan support. So I know this is pretty interesting because the whole, it came out and it's a pay-as-you-go service or a consumption-based plan. But then obviously with the dedicated options coming in. So yeah, it looks like now you can actually get 15 to 17% savings if you go ahead and commit upfront, which is interesting. I don't 100% know how that would work, but it sounds like they're now supporting that as of a couple of days ago. And then the other one I saw this morning when I logged on is that there's a data center in Italy now, which I just think that's awesome. It's our first Italian-based data center. So if you're looking to host some Italian, some data or some compute in Italy, we now have a data center over here in Italy. Yeah. I was gonna say if you're looking to store some Italian apps, I'm I don't know if the apps themselves are Italian, but yeah, I was an Italian minor in college, so I'm big fan of Italy.
Yeah. And I suppose the advantage to that is if you have Italian data residency requirements, in other words, your data has to reside in Italy for compliance reasons. That's something that would be very important to you. So glad to hear that. All right. Well, thanks for those updates, Kendall. Let's get over to our everyone knows Kendall, of course. But Alice, I'll let you go first. Introduce yourself, and Kendall, you can introduce your role at Diagrid as well. So go ahead, Alice.
Awesome. Thanks, Sujit. Yeah, and thanks for having us on the Azure podcast. I've definitely listened to this a couple of times, so I'm familiar. I am definitely a fan. My name is Alice Gibbons. I am a customer success engineer here at Diagrid, And I get to help, customers with all of our tooling that revolves around the DAPR project, as well as, architecture sessions, technical support, and kind of just working through like customer problems on their end. But before that, I was at Microsoft for a number of years. I was a cloud solution architect in the Azure application development space, and I was on the global black belt team where I met Kendall. Again, working on open source projects, things like DAPR, Kubernetes, you know the giant list of Azure application development services that falls under that role. So yeah, nice to be here.
That's great. Yeah, and Kendall, go ahead and also kind of give us a background on Diagrid, just at a quick high level.
Yeah, for sure. So I also want to give some additional kudos to Alice, because for those of you who don't know, Diagrid is a fairly new company. We've been around now, I don't know, Alice, what, a year and a half-ish?
Yeah, about.
Like maybe a little bit over that, right? So we're about like 25 strong. Alice is the only customer success engineer right now. So she really is like complete boots on the ground, like handling everything, especially for our first product, which launched, I don't know, when did the Conductor launch now? Probably at least a year ago.
About a year. Yeah, October of 2022. So exactly a year.
Yeah, so she really is like such an essential role in helping, work on these partnerships and frankly, just like being the representative of the product customers. So just want to like make sure that like give a little bit more context there from my perspective. But yeah, I mean, most of y'all know around December, January timeframe, I left Microsoft and transitioned over to working at Diagrid, and essentially just helping from a product management perspective. So really focusing on feature enhancements, the direction of the company as a whole, our product portfolio, like the breadth of that, right? What are the new products that we want to incubate? What are ways that we want to essentially stick to our core mission, which is making developer tools and services that essentially enable developers to be more productive and to build distributed apps more quickly. And it's obviously a big problem space. Like we all know the challenges that come with microservices development. And, if you're unfamiliar, Diagrid as a company, which once again is a year and a half old, is started by Mark Fussell and Jeroen Schneider, who are the founders of the Distributed Application Runtime, or DAPR project. So a lot of the core values and the mission that they set out to accomplish when they created DAPR for, conquering distributed applications, making them easier to run, is essentially a lot of the same motivation for why Diagrid was created. Is like, how do we elevate what we're doing with DAPR and continue to A, make it easier to use, B, make sure that we're unlocking its potential and making it more accessible to more people. So that's like really kind of the cornerstone of what Diagrid is, who started it. And so a lot of us, came from Microsoft. Mark, Jeroen, both from Microsoft, Alice and myself, and then we have several others. But then we have a great contingency of other amazing engineers and folks from a bunch of different organizations, tech companies with a lot of great experience. All really passionate about the developer space, and specifically streamlining application development and solving developer challenges. So it's kind of our like high level mission, I would say.
And so you did mention, some of the Conductor application or tool set, and can I give us some insight into that, and kind of especially how it kind of lends itself into AKS and I guess other Kubernetes in general as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Alice,
Happy to start with that one. Essentially what had happened, right, is so when Mark and Jeroen were both at Microsoft, they co-created the DAPR project, as Kendall mentioned, but then they also got to work with so many different customers who were using DAPR in production. And most of these are enterprises, which is kind of like wild for a open source project, honestly. And they realized, there are hundreds of problems that kind of needed to be solved hosting DAPR, specifically on Kubernetes, which is where over 90% of DAPR workloads are running these days, especially in production. And so they decided, it would be great to create some sort of tool that helps users run DAPR on Kubernetes and lower the operational burden, because it's not necessarily DAPR that is hard, but it is like Kubernetes. I think that's like kind of a known thing, especially in the cloud native ecosystem, right? And so what Conductor does, it's a SaaS solution, and it solves many different problems for running DAPR on Kubernetes, things like automated upgrades, visualization. It has, best practice kind of production recommendation advisories. We think we have over 40 of those now that are like automatically kind of baked into your cluster. So you just connect your cluster to Conductor, And you get these automatic recommendations essentially based on production best practices and, our team working with, over hundreds of people working with DAPR in production. As well as many other things. There's a automatic certificate rotation from an MTLS perspective. That's something that the open source project doesn't give you, as well as we also have cost recommendations for lowering kind of the cost of running DAPR on Kubernetes, because if you're familiar with DAPR, it runs as a sidecar pattern, and you can end up using more resources maybe necessarily than you want to within your cluster, just by running the control plane as well as the sidecars. So yeah, it sort of is it's a large SaaS solution that kind of gives you the lowering the overhead of running DAPR on Kubernetes and then giving you kind of best practices for production.
So that's interesting. So let's say if I have an AKS cluster, right, and I'm planning to get that prepped up for running DAPR. Yeah. Explain to me what the mechanics are too. You said something about connecting it to Diagrid or connecting it to your SaaS solution, I believe. So how does that work? What are the mechanics around that?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, you did mention on AKS. So it runs on we can run all the main cloud distributions today. So that's like AKS, EKS, GKE, or we have many customers that run local Kubernetes distributions, whether that be Kine or Minikube or something on their local machine. And then we do also support OpenShift, and that includes Azure, Red Hat OpenShift, or Arrow. But essentially, in order to install, all you have to do is install the Conductor agent on your cluster. So I would be playing the role of a cluster admin or something. And I would essentially take I would create what's called a cluster connection within Conductor. And I would create this and I would install this. It's a very tiny agent, runs on your cluster. And this reaches outbound from your cluster itself into the Diagrid cloud. Essentially our SaaS service that powers a dashboard that has a bunch of visualization as well as opportunities for managing the entire DAPR upgrade and rollback process if necessary, as well as some of the advisories and the other features I was talking about before. But yeah, essentially you just install an agent. It's a Kubernetes deployment and a daemon set that gets installed on your cluster, and then it reports back these insights kind of immediately.
I will say too, Sajid, just to add on something that is good to clarify early on as well, is that really today Conductor is very much an operational tool. So there's not a lot of hey, I'm going into Conductor and I'm actually sending commands, or I'm deploying Helm charts from there, or making configuration changes. Now, that's not to say that we never want to get into the space of being able to better help people make quick changes if that's something they're interested in doing. But just kind of wanted to call out that it's really more, everything's still running on your cluster, all of your data is staying there. We obfuscate, sensitive details and information. And really it's more and it's not on your hot path, right? So if Conductor if the Conductor agent was to go down, it doesn't actually impact the ability to use DAPR, right? DAPR is going to continue to run, the control plane will continue to run. What you lose is sort of that visibility or the ability to upgrade, for that momentary second. Not to say you should expect it to go down, but the reality is it does bring customers peace of mind to know it's not, hey, if this goes down, my entire workload is going to go down, or DAPR is going to stop functioning. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. But Alice, feel free to chime in.
No. That's great point, Kendall. I was just going to say, it does manage that DAPR control plane, which, if you're not familiar, the DAPR control plane needs to be kind of kept up at all times in order for your DAPR applications and sidecars to be running and communicating effectively with each other. But yeah, essentially the management of that DAPR control plane, those pods are offloaded to the agent. But yeah, as Kendall mentioned, if the agent itself goes down, the control plane is still up, right? It's still running within your cluster typically.
Now, I recently did a couple of DAPR projects for a large financial services company, right? And there are significant challenges deploying DAPR into an AKS cluster or any Kubernetes for that matter. It requires all these permissions to deploy those Helm charts. There is, like you said, different security settings that have to be made. Cluster role bindings and whatnot. Explain to me how Conductor would fit into that. When you say it's the operational part, is that what is helping you kind of structure or get a visibility in? Okay, this is the best way to set this up in your cluster?
Yeah, so that's definitely a piece of it. When you install the conductor agent on your cluster, you can essentially choose if you already have DAPR installed there, you can say, hey, I would like to upgrade the existing installation of my DAPR control plane and sidecars, or essentially you can install DAPR fresh into a new cluster. And we do provide both development and production kind of quote unquote, Helm settings that, we have kind of chosen within the Helm chart for those specific environments. So that's definitely one piece. It'll recommend, Helm values for your environment. But then once you have kind of the cluster connection up and running, and once you have actually installed DAPR into the cluster, then the visibility itself really comes from the applications. How your applications are communicating with each other, the metrics around error rate, latency, kind of those 3 golden metrics that you get that you want to see for all of your apps. And again, because DAPR runs as a sidecar model, the specific calls from your application to your sidecar, as well as vice versa, and then component metrics. So DAPR, has the idea of components, which are essentially like infrastructure connections that, abstract the actual infrastructure away from your applications. So we do also provide, views and graphs and insights into these component metrics, as well as automatic alerting that is set up for all of the error rates in your cluster, or, if your pods are going, your DAPR sidecars are going down. We have automatic alerting for all of that kind of built in. So it's just like an easier way. Of course, you could set all of that up yourself, but it's just an easier way. DAPR produces over 120 metrics like within the open source project. And so figuring out which ones to look at can be really difficult, and making, dashboards and graphs for specific metrics is like not a trivial amount of work, really, right? So that's kind of where that visualization comes in and that insight. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So what I'm hearing is that it's more about getting insights into what's happening inside of DAPR, as opposed to configuring DAPR itself, right? It's more about, here's what I see, here's what you should do, and this is the kind of operational status of DAPR. Is that kind of a summary of everything?
Yeah, I mean, again, a little bit of both, I would say, but primarily we do want to really help with the day 2 operations, at least in this point. We do have, many ideas in terms of getting into kind of developer-centric clusters, because again, DAPR is a developer tool, but then of course it's kind of tossed over the fence, if you will, and hosted by the ops team. So we wanted to lower that barrier for the operations, for the platform teams initially, and then we want to work to help developers kind of in the long run with the product.
I know that.
I will say, I was just gonna add on to that too, Sajid. So one thing to consider is that we do see different ways that customers engage with Conductor. So some customers are like, hey, we're going onto Kubernetes. We really think DAPR is a great developer tool for us to leverage. This is a great runtime. It's going to provide a lot of benefits. How can I start with best practices from day 1? So to me, in that case, they can really leverage some of that more, hey, I'm starting fresh with a new cluster. I want DAPR to be installed and completely managed by Conductor from day 1. But we also have customers who are running hundreds of clusters, have thousands of components, and already really have DAPR installed on a lot of their clusters. So they're not necessarily going to come to Conductor for the installation bits, as they have, they have that already done. They're going to then say, hey, I want to offload all of this management, and I want to get full visibility at scale across these clusters through Conductor. So I definitely think, kind of to Alice's point, there are multiple personas that benefit from this, but some customers and what they're looking to get out of the product might be slightly different depending on the stage of adoption that they're at. That makes sense.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, one of the, I was mentioning, working with this customer to try and get it deployed, and they are not willing to adopt the AKS agent for DAPR, right? They want to be able to install the Helm chart themselves because they don't want to give too much of security permissions to something like a daemon set or an agent that they don't understand, right? So how do you kind of address that concern where, they really want to be very prescriptive in the security permissions that they're giving to the cluster, because DAPR probably has carte blanche access to a lot of the cluster, right? And they want to make sure that it's only got the right amount of permission. So is that something that the product also handles, those kind of requirements?
Yeah, good question. And we work also a lot with some financial companies, as well as people with very stringent security requirements. So I've definitely heard that come up. You're not the first person to say that for sure. We do have a way you can install a conductor just sort of in a read-only mode. And what that will do is it'll just look at the applications in the sidecars and give you more of a metrics view and visibility view into the cluster itself, and will not actually do the management of the control plane, which was a feature request from a financial customer. So yes, we can kind of deploy in that model. That's one thing. However, you do lose some of the benefits of the conductor tool itself. We're not able to do the automatic upgrades of the control plane, or we do offer also like automatic rollback. So if the upgrade to the control plane fails, what we'll do is we'll actually roll back automatically to the previous version that was successful within your cluster. And we do also get things, we have like new versions, like release candidate versions. DAPR 112 is coming out hopefully this week, and essentially we'll have the release candidate version. I think it's RC4 that's in Conductor right now, able for new users to try out. So we totally do have an option to kind of deploy Conductor in a read-only mode, if you will, but you do lose some of the capabilities for sure.
DAPR dashboard is something that we've been using a lot and it's targeted as a developer tool, right? They say like if you're doing development, you want to use DAPR dashboard. They don't recommend you use it in production, right? To actually deploy it. Is the Conductor seen as something that can be used both in development and in a production setting? Or like do developers also kind of use that tool?
Yeah, and that's actually something we've seen come up like more recently than anything. Kind of as Kendall mentioned, like depending on the stage where the user is in their DAPR journey, right? If they are kind of just starting out and they're like, we only have this project in kind of dev test and we have big ideas for the future, but today here's where it is. I would say we have a ton of those customers that are using, they've connected every one of their dev clusters. That's like their Minikube cluster on their local machine, and they're using it kind of for insights. But then we have multiple other customers who are using kind of the production version, if you will, and we are working towards creating more developer-centric features. Because again, additionally, we created this product primarily for those ops teams, those users that were in later stages of development, but now we're seeing more and more uptake into the local dev experience. But on the DAPR dashboard, for sure, yes, the DAPR dashboard is great. It doesn't give you kind of the same level of insights. And in the newest version of DAPR, it has been removed from the Helm chart. So in like DAPR 111 and above, you might notice that. But yeah, still a great dev tool for sure.
Yeah, and to me, I think Conductor is sort of like what that dashboard would have looked like if it hadn't been sort of like something that just came out of someone's mind as like, wow, we really want visibility into this. Like to me, the intention behind the DAPR dashboard is a lot of what motivated this, intention behind Conductor. But obviously, the level of breadth and the amount of work and the feature set is extremely rich. But yeah, that's one thing that's hard about the podcast is we can't give a visual, because it would be so nice to be able to like pull it up and kind of walk through. But we do have a lot of resources we'll send after this, and we do monthly webinars and stuff. So definitely, if you're interested in kind of seeing this real time, the visual will help kind of draw the distinction between the two services.
One of the things I really wanted to see in the DAPR dashboard was a historical view, right? Because I remember we used a lot of actors, DAPR actors in our project, for example, and the number of actors was going up to 1,000 and was coming down, and I wanted to go back in time and say, okay, when I ran this test, what was how many actors were active? So how does that look like in Conductor? Can I go back in time and say, okay, what happened at that particular time frame?
Yeah. So like all of our logs and metrics we do, show them up to the past like 7 days, working on retention to up to 30. But yeah, essentially we have logs and metrics for that you can see, and you can see kind of each of the graphs. So you can look at actors, for instance. We've had so many people say, I would love to get some more visibility into my DAPR actors. It was like one of our most requested features, honestly. And so within the newest version of it's DAPR 111, we have enabled within the open source project many new metrics that have come with the open source project. And then, of course, created graphs and default kind of visualizations for those. So you can see, how many actor invocations you've had over the past 7 days, how many actor errors or timers fired or reminders fired. All of that is displayed up into Conductor, and you can create custom alerts on all of it.
Yeah, and that's another thing, like I think we kind of emphasized this in the beginning, but obviously like Diagrid really is like a company that's very much centered around DAPR. And so like when we have a team, just similar to how Microsoft works, right? We have a team that's like dedicated to contributing upstream and making sure that we have really good visibility and alignment on the upstream project. So the speed at which we can get like features from upstream into the product is like quite astounding, just like because we are nimble and we're very focused on this. So, you know, after metrics, once again, in upstream became available in 111 and they're already in the product, right? Not only just like visibility into them, but actually like the user interface and the, you know, the client experiences, which is something that I've really appreciated, is just the speed at which we try to align and get the DAPR innovation into the customer's hands in a managed way, like extremely fast, which yeah, I just think that's something worth highlighting.
And since this is run in a SaaS model, I guess in Diagrid's own cloud somewhere, there's not a whole lot of overhead, I'm guessing, on the AKS cluster, right? The agent that's running there, it's primarily what it's kind of monitoring all these events and the signals that it's getting from the various DAPR components. I'm assuming it's like Golang and whatnot, and interconnection into all of that, and sending it all up to the SaaS product. Is that how it works?
Yeah, pretty much. So it only reaches outbound. Yeah, again, we wanted to have as few outbound kind of connectivity requirements as possible for like our enterprise customers. But essentially, yeah, the agent itself runs on your cluster. There is also a daemon set that runs there, which would be like a version of the OpenTelemetry collector that we have modified to collect some of those metrics. And today we're only collecting DAPR sidecar logs as well as DAPR metrics. So none of that information is, you know, private or personal. And we have, yeah, you're right, send that back up to our cloud. We do also offer a Kubernetes operator deployment. And so essentially what you can do is, if you use like a GitOps model, like Flux or Argo or something, what you can do is use our Kubernetes operator and install that on your cluster instead. And this will, again, manage the it does the same thing. It'll manage like the control plane. It'll manage the lifecycle of DAPR, the version, etc., and as well as the agent and daemon set itself, and then still, yeah, send up to our cloud.
Yeah, and like I think Alice touched on this briefly, but one thing to highlight is like not only is the conductor agent and like these daemon sets, like that's kind of the only requirements on your cluster, but obviously people are like very intentional about not wanting to add an overhead to their clusters, right? There's like already so many things running in them. So one thing we've heard from a lot of customers is that one of the neat features is, and I know Alice did talk about this, but I just want to like double click a little bit, and I'm sure she can add some color as well. But think about the fact that when you're getting these best practice recommendations, they're not just, hey, you should run the sidecar with this much CPU and memory. We're actually saying, based on the throughput or based on the activity happening across your application and the associated sidecars, we actually give recommendations on how to optimize the application pods themselves. So we have heard from customers that we've significantly reduced their usage, not just like the DAPR control plane or like the DAPR data plane in terms of the sidecars, but also the actual like consumption of the application workloads themselves. So Alice, I don't know if you want to highlight that more specifically, but yeah, I think that's been a big win.
So we have had customers tell us that like we have reduced their CPU and memory usage, for instance, between 50 and 80% for some of their application and sidecars. Again, because when you are running DAPR at a high scale, you think about how many applications and how many sidecars you have. So if you have, 100 apps, and then you have, what we do is we look at the top 10 most resource intensive apps, and then over the past 10 to 15 days, and then recommend lower values based on their average CPU and memory utilization for you kind of going forward. So yeah, we've had very good reports from our customers around that specific feature.
So you're saying that based on that, they can change the resource limits on the pods? Yeah. Is that what you're saying? And so that therefore they can be more densely packed in the cluster, I guess, put in more pods in there.
Yes, exactly. And that, it's a hard problem, right? Like sizing your applications, especially when you have, like, again, the applications and the sidecars. So we try and kind of reduce some of that. We also do have some other performance advisories specifically around like ensuring that you're setting, like as Kendall alluded to, the like control plane limits and requests for the application for the DAPR control plane.
Yeah, kind of specifically on that. I know we reached some limits around reminders, right? I think there's also some limits around reminders, like we can have 5,000 or something like that. So does it track all those all that activity and say, oh, hey, you're kind of getting close to that, or we don't recommend you use you overusing reminders or whatever may be the case. I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah, so great question. This actually just came up this week because one of the things that is happening within the DAPR 112 release is there's been many improvements on reminders. And one of the things that the open source kind of project is looking to do for DAPR 113 is kind of improve reminders and remove the limit that you're talking about. So we don't have that specific advisory within Conductor because again, that's something that we want to fix upstream, if you will. But yes, you would have full visibility into kind of, again, how many were being called, like when they were last invoked, as well as the error rate on those specific reminders, which you would start seeing after you hit that limit for sure.
Yeah, and we've Alice does a great job of kind of reevaluating what are the potential default alerts or alert rules that we have in the product. And as new features come into DAPR Upstream, right, we want to make sure that we're being as proactive as possible in providing customers visibility into things we know that they're going to face down the road, whether it's like actors or workflow instances maybe being overutilized. That's something we're also wanting to get into the Conductor product, is support for workflows and visibility into those as well. So yeah, just something we're calling out there. It's just we're constantly learning from what's happening in upstream. And you can tell Alice is extremely knowledgeable about what's happening there because of how much it impacts the product and what she hears from customers. So.
Right.
Yeah, and actually, sorry, Sajid, I didn't mean to cut you off, but what you mentioned earlier around the deployment model and DAPR needing so many permissions, that is it needs permissions to be deployed into your cluster. That is also something that has become a hot topic, is sort of being able to deploy DAPR at a namespace level. That is sort of namespace and doesn't have kind of it doesn't reach outside of that. We have had multiple people kind of ask for this, as well as working kind of towards it within the upstream project as well. So.
Great. Yeah, I was wondering, so if somebody wants to get started on this, using or playing around with Diagrid, what's the kind of best way? Is it like, okay, I've got my mini AKS, as you know, nowadays is a thing, and or got my mini cube or whatever set up. Is that the best way to kind of kick the tires a little bit on Diagrid?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. It's very much, again, we support pretty much every Kubernetes distribution within CNCF. Again, the main ones we test on, of course, are the cloud backed ones, as I mentioned, AKS, EKS, GKE, and OpenShift. But we do, if you had any local distribution, we are offering free trials as well of Conductor. We typically may have them 30-day trials, and then if you have a project that is using DAPR within production, 100%, I'll post a link, or I'll put the link in the show notes here for how to sign up for one of those.
Yeah, and I do want to call out, we haven't mentioned this yet, and can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So this is something that Alice is really spearheading, but I know that we wanted to kind of just highlight this as something that Azure users specifically should be mindful of, is that we're actually working to get Conductor into the Azure Marketplace. So if you were interested in connecting Conductor to your AKS cluster, it'd be a super simple process, very similar to the process for working with most SaaS services. And obviously there's some requirements that have to be met in order to include something in the marketplace. So those are things we're working on now, but yeah, just stay tuned. If you're really interested in working with Conductor, that might be the best way for you to get up and running. Minimally, you're probably still going to want to go through the process of meeting with us and talking to us about the product, but it's still something to consider, that it will be at least visible and discoverable there. Yeah, so just I just wanted to call that out. Yeah, just something to be mindful of. And then I know Alice, we had one more thing that we wanted to highlight just before the end of the call. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of, in addition to Conductor, what we're also offering customers?
Yeah, for sure. I guess the only other thing to besides the Azure Marketplace, one of the other things that we do that we have been working really hard on is our support model around the DAPR enterprise support. And so essentially what we do is we offer production SLA support for Conductor, of course, but then we have open source DAPR support where we help investigate DAPR production issues, and we can provide temporary patches for priority issues within DAPR upstream. And again, we do have an engineering team that's entirely focused on upstream patches. Of course, we cannot guarantee that it'll be an upstream project within any time because it is an open source project, but we can give patched builds, so like images of the DAPR runtime to our customers within, up to 72 hours kind of reporting a critical issue in production. So yeah, just something that we add that comes like along with Conductor for sure, but that is something that kind of you get with the product as well.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much for all that detail. Anything else you want to add in terms of what's upcoming? You talked about some of the developer tooling and things that you're working on. Anything that you can discuss publicly?
I think on the Conductor side, I think Alice did a good job of like being generic while not giving away like specific features. A lot of that is just because it's still things that we're designing and kind of determining the best way that we can integrate those products in. But overarching theme is how do we, now that we've lowered the operational burden, how do we now bring developers more into the forefront and make Conductor something that's suitable and provides the kind of capabilities they're also looking for to get more out of the product. But we are working on another product at Diagrid. So I can just share briefly, if you go to our website, you can take a quick peek at it. So it's not something that I can give a timeline on, but it is something that we've been incubating, that I've been focused on pretty much since I joined. And really the goal is how do we unlock DAPR from Kubernetes, like at a kind of small fundamental level, right? How do we take all of these amazing API-based capabilities and essentially allow customers to access them from anywhere, right? So like Alice mentioned in the beginning, 90% of our customers running in production with DAPR are running on Kubernetes. So like, how do we help alleviate some of the lock-in that we see with DAPR and Kubernetes and instead bring a lot of those core capabilities to customers with more flexibility? So that's just something to consider. Definitely we'll hopefully, be able to come on and talk about that product in the future as it'll have a lot of great, Azure capabilities as well. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that we're definitely not stopping at, Conductor. We have a lot of really great ideas on how we can make developers' lives easier, essentially, and really help unlock from that, the current open source Kubernetes-centric mindset and really bring those DAPR capabilities to more people. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. Feel free to take a look at our website and just stay tuned, as hopefully we'll have some announcements about that product in the coming months, coming years. Just stay tuned. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks. This has been great. Really good insights into the product and how it works with Kubernetes and AKS and other Kubernetes installations as well. So kudos on the new offering and hope all goes well. So we'll get some of those links for you and put them in the show notes along with this recording. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess the last thing I was going to say, Shruti, if anyone's at KubeCon, we'll have a booth there. We'll be showing off, many our existing product in Conductor and maybe have a sneak peek of our new one. So yeah, come say hi.
Will do.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll both be there.